Hi, everyone. My name's Bree, and I work for Island Clinical Counselling as a registered clinical counselor. And I'm here with Sophie today to talk about her personal experiences with OCD. So, welcome, Sophie. So, first of all, what was your sort of journey with OCD like? Like, how did you get diagnosed, and kind of what was the beginning part of it?
Yeah, for sure. So growing up, I was always a pretty anxious kid. But nothing out of the ordinary. Um, and then starting in 2019, that anxiety sort of started to build and it started to really center on getting sick. And as time went on, the anxiety kind of became more and more to the point that it was taking away parts of my life and it was really impairing my function. So I couldn't do lots of the normal things that I wanted to be able to do. Um, and so I had been seeing a psychologist for the generalized anxiety for a while. And in consultation with her, we sort of discussed this increase in anxiety that I was experiencing and then the behaviors that were associated with the anxiety. And that led us to the diagnosis of OCD. So from there, unfortunately, my OCD did continue to get worse and worse. But then I was lucky enough to take part in the provincial OCD program through BC Children's Hospital in 2020, and that really was major the major step towards getting better for me. It really helped me get started on the process of recovery, and I feel like I did a lot of work in the program, and I also learned a lot about myself and a lot of the skills I needed to fight OCD that I am able to use to this day.
Amazing. Yeah. So it sounds like a really hard kind of like discovery, but then you've learned a lot of skills that are kind of like empowering now, which is amazing. And what was it like for you when you got diagnosed with OCD, when you and your psychologist kind of like figured that out?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes, well, anxiety is a very isolating experience. I remember being like, wow, I'm so worried about all these things, and it feels like nobody around me is worried about them either. Um, and so that's sort of a compounding factor. Like, oh, I don't feel good, but also everybody else around me seems to be fine. Like, what's going on here? And so having the diagnosis of OCD, in some ways is definitely validating because, I'm like, oh, what I'm experiencing, like, this is a real thing. This isn't, I'm not making it up or it's not, like fake. This is real. And there's other people with, similar experiences to me who have, made it through and have a normal life living with OCD. Um, on the other hand, there also definitely is some media stigma around OCD. It's definitely talked about in the media and demonized in some ways and made to look like this big, scary monster of a diagnosis. And so there definitely was some fear following the diagnosis of, wow, the media portrays people with OCD as being totally debilitated and unable to live a normal life. And definitely some fear of like, oh, is that what my life is going to be like now? So I think that, there were sort of two sides to getting diagnosed, but definitely in the long run, it's definitely been helpful in terms of accessing the support I need and feeling validated in my experience.
Yeah. And what was the hardest part? Like, what was your kind of lowest that you remember with OCD, and how did you work to get through it?
Yeah, so as I said, I started uh, becoming more and more anxious in 2019, and throughout 2020, um, over the period of about 2 months, I went from living a semi-normal life to being pretty much not able to do anything at all. I couldn't go to school, I couldn't socialize. I just sat in my room all day and didn't do anything because the OCD was so in control of my life. And so that was definitely, a low point for me was not being able to do anything. Um, and I remember, you know, during that time when I was really not doing well and OCD was the main factor in control of my life, um, I remember kind of realizing like, oh, this isn't just going to go away on its own. Because I think I had been living in this fantasy where one day I was going to wake up and, magically OCD would be gone and I would be back to normal and healthy and happy and living a normal life again. And I remember one day I was just like, oh, that's not how this works. Like this isn't something that just goes away. And I I thought like, you know, I'd done some treatment for OCD, like ERP therapy, but I had always sort of been not skeptical, but one foot in, one foot out, because ERP is uncomfortable and it's not really something that I would want to be doing. But I remember when I was really ill, it was like every single day was a walking, talking, living ERP because the OCD was so strong that it encroached on every part of my life and nothing felt safe. And so I remember thinking, like, wow, either I can, continue living as I am and basically live one giant ERP for the rest of my life, or I can, commit to doing the planned, scheduled, programmed ERP therapy, which has proven over and over to help fight OCD. And I can commit to that and then live, a fulfilling, happy life after I do this treatment. And so I think that that was an empowering realization for me to, think about the fact that either I keep living what was basically no life at all because OCD was the one ruling the show, or I could do something hard and scary for a month and then a little bit for the rest of my life, but I would then be able to live a happy and fulfilling life afterwards. So that was really a big turning point for me in terms of accepting accepting that OCD was part of my life and that I would need to, commit to and do the ERP treatment to get better.
Yeah. That sounds really powerful. So it's sort of like, you were living with it every day, all day. And so then it came to the point where like I'm ready to put in the work. And what sort of like supported you to put in that really hard work? Was there anything or people or there was obviously that internal motivation, which is really, really important where you got to, but what else supported you to sort of like put in that really hard work?
Definitely the people around me for sure. So my family was very supportive of me doing the treatment and really supported me, throughout the tough times and then through the good times as well. So I really am grateful to them for all their support throughout everything and to this day, grateful for their support of me and the way that OCD impacts my life still. Um, and then definitely, uh, I'm very grateful to the therapists and psychiatrists and doctors at BC Children's Hospital. They really, um, OCD is their jam. They like they work with people like me every day, and having people who really know what they're doing and believe in the treatment and believe in their patients. So myself to be able to beat OCD, that was really an empowering part of the process was having these people who really believed in me and had seen ERP work over and over again for patients with OCD. So those definitely my family and the team at BC Children's was really they were really essential to my success with ERP treatment.
Yeah, that's really amazing that you had all that support. Was there times when you thought that the ERP wouldn't work?
Oh, definitely yes. Like sometimes, well, no, not sometimes. I think that often doing ERP, when you're doing it, you're like, wow, this is the worst thing I could ever have imagined. Why am I doing this? This is useless. Because really with ERP, there's not a lot of immediate positive feedback. You don't feel better while you're doing it. Actually, you feel worse while you're doing it. The benefit comes after in, the days and weeks and months and years that follow the treatment. And so definitely sometimes when it feels like you're not making much progress on the ERP, you're still feeling just as scared all the time. That's a really hard place to be, is when you're feeling like the treatment isn't working. And so definitely when I felt like I wasn't making, perfectly linear upward progress in with my ERP treatment, um, that was definitely hard point in the treatment program, because it feels like, wow, I'm putting in all this work and nothing's happening. Why am I doing this? I should just quit. But I'm very glad that I stuck to it and kept going and kept doing the treatment because that's how I am where I am today.
Yeah. And so, what helped you to stick with it, even though you were feeling like it wasn't working? And how did you notice that? Was there a turning point when you noticed that it was starting to get easier?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that, as time went on and I was doing more and more difficult ERPs, I would think back on, the ERPs that I was doing a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, and I'm like, wow, I can do that every day now, no problem. Like, for example, one of the first things that I started doing at the program was drinking water from the tap because I thought that drinking water from the tap would make me sick. And, in the first couple of days of the program, that was really hard. Like that was a 10 out of 10 on the fear scale. And then, 1 week later, I was just doing that almost subconsciously. And, in taking time to reflect and being like, oh yeah, like 1 week ago, I couldn't do this without debilitating fear, and now I'm doing it no problem. That was really cool when I started to gain some of those like essential life things back. Um, it was empowering because I was like, wow, this ERP is working. And B, I'm starting to feel more like a normal person again. Um, which was which was really, really nice because I think that part of part of OCD that is really hard is the way it alienates you from everyone else around you. Um, and it's really hard to feel like a normal person in society when it feels like your life is ruled by OCD. And so as I started to gain back these, essential parts of a normal life that everybody else around me was doing, that was a really nice way for me to see that the ERP was working. Um, I think there was a first part to your question that I didn't answer.
I think you answered both. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, how would you describe OCD to people?
I feel like this is an ongoing conversation I have with myself is how to describe it. The best I've come up with is it feels like there's a little voice in your head that's not it's not me, but it's just there and it's telling me, to be afraid of this, to be afraid of that. This thing is bad. This thing is, going to make you sick. And then it also comes up with these fake suggestions. So it says, oh, Sophie, you should be really scared of eating that snack. But you know what? If you go wash your hands 5 times and then use hand sanitizer and then eat the snack, you're going to be fine. And I'm like, oh, great. Let's go do that. And so I do that and I eat my snack and then I'm scared anyway. And I'm like, oh my God, why did I eat that snack? I'm going to be sick. This is terrible. I can't believe I did that. And it just grows and grows and grows. And it's sort of like this little voice in your head, it starts really small at the beginning. And as you give in more and more to those compulsions and the obsessions that it's, feeding you, it takes over more and more, and the voice gets louder and louder and louder until the OCD voice is stronger and louder than my own voice. And it's the one that really dictates what I do with my life. And then in treatment, what we work on is making my voice stronger and more powerful than the OCD voice. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great description. And how did you learn to, or did you always know, like that there was sort of like two different voices, or when you first were experiencing it, did it just sound like one voice? Like was work and treatment to like kind of separate those two voices so you could differentiate them?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the very basic things that I learned about OCD right at the beginning, and something that I still remind myself of to this day and is very helpful, is that the OCD is not me. So I think initially, because these are thoughts that are happening in my head, it feels like I'm fighting against myself. But really focusing and remembering the fact that the OCD isn't you and it's this external factor really helps to move forward with treatment. And so my mom's favorite thing to say was, Sophie, it's a third party. And so it's like this external thing that's in my giving me these thoughts, these obsessions, these compulsions, and it's my job to, shut that external thing out. But it's not me. I'm not the one coming up with these things or, you know, having these thoughts. They're being put there by something else and by OCD. And my job is to fight them off.
Yeah. And that's really amazing. So, what are some other really great tools that you learned in treatment that you continue to use even in your daily life now?
I think that one of the big things that I learned in treatment and that I use every single day to this day is being able to identify what is an OCD thought and what is a Sophie thought. Because, they're both in my head. They get muddled pretty easily, but it's much, much easier to fight back against the obsessions and the compulsions when I know that it's not me and that it's the OCD. And so learning how to identify what is me and what is an OCD thought is really, really helpful and really essential in moving forward, both with treatment and then with daily life.
Yeah. So I imagine that was really hard to start with. And so how do you do that? Because I know that OCD can be a little bit sneaky. And so how do you figure out like or differentiate that it's an OCD thought and not a Sophie thought?
Yeah, so it's definitely something that I've picked up over time. It's a bit of a hard skill to pick up on, but I find that oftentimes the way that I can really identify it is it's I'm feeling anxious about something specific, but there's no real basis to the fear. So, a, a, a normal thought that causes anxiety could be like, oh, I have a final exam tomorrow and I haven't studied. Okay, like that makes sense. But when I'm having a thought like, oh, if I eat that snack, I'm gonna get sick, like that doesn't even make sense. And so being able to really notice when I feel anxious about something and then being able to identify, oh, is this being caused by, a logical factor, or is this being caused by something that doesn't really make sense? That's a really essential way for me to notice what is an OCD thought and what is a Sophie thought. And really what that comes back to at its basis is being able to identify when I feel anxious because sometimes, well, oftentimes, OCD is very sneaky and you almost don't even notice that you're having an obsession and that you're feeling anxious. Um, and so being able to identify that feeling and then being able to trace it back to the thought is really the essential skill there.
Yeah. And so what do you do when you identify that it's an OCD thought and not a Sophie thought?
Yeah. So, identification is the first step. Oh, this is an OCD thought. And then I realize, oh, well, this thought, it's not based in fact, it's not logical, it doesn't really make sense. And so, depending on what kind of obsession it is, if it's something that doesn't really bother me too much, I can just sort of be like, okay, that's an OCD thought. We're not going to listen to it. We're going to move forward with my day, or with whatever I was doing, and not give it any airtime. Just okay, that's an OCD thought. You're done now. Move forward with everything else. But then sometimes if it's an obsession that is causing me more distress or is harder for me to move through, then that's when I would really bring in some of the strategies that I've learned through treatment to be able to, continue with my day, even though this OCD, the obsession is causing me a bit more distress.
Yeah. So what are some of those tools that you would use?
Yeah, for sure. So, um, there are a couple different ways of doing it. Um, One that I really like is to do whatever it is that's scaring me. So oftentimes the obsession is related to an action. So like if I eat this thing or if I go to this place, something bad is going to happen. And so when I identify that, oh, this is an OCD thought and this is causing me quite a bit of distress, then I say, okay, I'm going to do this thing, and then I'm going to do something else afterwards to distract myself or to sort of drown out the OCD worries with happy feelings or other things like that. So that can be like listening to a good song or watching a short video or just spending time with my family and friends, things that can sort of let me do the behavior, but be able to, continue with my day normally. even though I'm dealing with a little bit of that OCD anxiety, is really essential. Um, that's sort of the biggest one within that I use within my daily life because it's easy to do on my own and nobody else really needs to know that I'm doing it. And so that's the one that I really use a lot in daily life. Um, when you're doing ERP treatment, there are lots of different strategies that can be used, and they can also be applied in real life. I think sort of one that I practiced a lot was sort of if doing the full action that the obsession is targeting feels too scary, doing like half of it. So, for example, if it's like, oh, this feels really scary to eat this snack, only eat half the snack. And so that, is a bit more of a manageable amount of distress. But you're still doing the action and you're still fighting back against the OCD without, being unable to cope afterwards. So different things like that can really help make fighting back against the OCD more manageable when it feels like, whoa, the level of distress that this is causing me is beyond that, which I can just, sort of put my head down and push through.
So are there times when you notice that OCD kind of gets bigger for you, like certain times or seasons, or if there's compounding stressors, like how does OCD impact you like that?
Yeah, for sure. So I know that for me, when I'm stressed out by other things in my life, that's when OCD really likes to get worse. And so things like final exam periods or stressful times at work, things like that, that's when it really gets worse because I'm preoccupied by these other things that are going on in my life, and I'm not quite as good as picking up on the OCD thoughts. Um, and so that's really a big one is being able to identify when it's going to get worse. And now I can predict those times. So, when I'm going into a hard period of time with school or work or things like that, I can sort of preemptively prepare myself and implement strategies that can help me fight back against the OCD before it even starts to get worse. And so that's a really helpful thing is to sort of be able to be one step ahead of it and know how it's going to act and what it's going to do so that I can, be there before it gets there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So what would you do like if you were going into a stressful time? What kind of systems would you put into place to kind of like preemptively get OCD?
Yeah, for sure. So a couple different things. One is being having a strong support system is really essential in OCD. And so being on the same page with my support system is really, really helpful. So, being like, hey, mom and dad, or my friends, or my sibling, like, I'm coming up into a little bit of a tough time right now, and I think that OCD might be, poking its head out a little bit more. Can you help me identify can you help me identify when I'm having obsessions that I might not even notice? Because often the distress and the anxiety caused by it displays through my body language, and they almost might notice it before I do. So having them be there to sort of help me pick up on the OCD thoughts and then be able to fight back against them is really helpful. Um, Another thing that I know works for some people but doesn't work for other people is I'm on an SSRI, and so oftentimes I will work with my doctor to if I know I'm going to be going into a longer tough period, like with a really intense term at school or things like that, where it's going to be lasting for a while. Sometimes I will put the dose of the SSRI up just by a really little bit, but just having that extra boost behind me I find can be really helpful in maintaining a strong baseline of being able to fight back against the anxiety without having to be putting a lot of my emotional effort and capacity into fighting back against the OCD. So that's something that works for me. It might not work for everybody, but it's definitely is something that I've realized that I can use when I know that things are going to be a little bit trickier for a longer period of time. It can just help me as an extra support.
And so you talked about like friends being able to support you and obviously your family as well, who's been really supportive. So how do you ask people or how do you tell people about your OCD and then how do you engage them for support? So if it's, say, a friend who hasn't been with you for the whole journey, how do you let them know how they can support you?
Yeah, so it's definitely a hard it's a hard thing to do because there's a lot of societal stigma around OCD and, the kind of people that have OCD and things like that. And so it often, even now, feels a bit scary to talk about my OCD. You know, I will happily talk about it with people that I don't know. But when it comes to telling people like my friends and things like that, I still get a bit nervous. So, you know, I try to make the conversation kind of like casual and not a big deal because I feel like I'm like, okay, we need to sit down and have this conversation together. It makes me more nervous. It makes them nervous. And it's like, oh, this feels very scary and formal. So I try to just sort of pick a time where, I know I have a little bit of time just with that friend or with two friends or whoever I'm telling. And then just be like, oh yeah, like I, wanted to tell you guys something. Like you might notice that I act a little bit differently sometimes, especially around people who are sick or like events where there's food that people are sharing and things like that. So I try to pin down like specific situations in which my OCD impacts me and then acknowledge that they maybe have noticed me do it and maybe they didn't think twice about it or they sort of were like, oh, that was a weird thing that Sophie just did, but I didn't, whatever. And so sort of loop them in so they can really see where it impacts me in my life. That's where I try to start. And then I say, yeah, so I have OCD. And I sort of explain to them the basics of OCD, like, oh, I have these thoughts that really scare me, and I have these actions that I think will make me feel better, but they don't. And then I give them a little bit of background. I say, this is something that I've struggled with for a while, and it's part of my life. It's a very small part of who I am, but it's there for me every day. And so I work hard to, be able to live my most normal life, um, despite the fact that I have OCD. And then I say, sometimes, well, no, then I say, you guys are really important to me and you're an important part of my life. And an important part for me with fighting back against OCD is having the important people in my life be on the same page as me and know how to support me. And so some ways that you can support me are X, Y, and Z. So how I ask people to support me really depends on who they are. So if it's, like a group project member, so like a partner I'm doing a school project with, and for some reason OCD is, going to play a role in that, I just keep it super basic. Like if you can work with the bacteria in the lab, because that's a really hard part for me, and I can be the assistant instead of the one doing it. That would be great. And so give them a really explicit way that they can help me like that. Or then if it's, my friends who I'm with all the time and asking for their support, I can sometimes say, hey, if you notice me getting really anxious about something and, you're not really sure why, you could just check in and be like, hey, everything okay? What's going on? Things like that. And then also I will point out some of the big things that trigger my obsession. So like events with lots of people in crowded spaces, especially events with food, things like that. And I can say, if when we're at those and I seem a little bit anxious or hesitant or things like that, if you can just give me like a little bit of encouragement, like, hey, you got this, or like, let's go do this together, things like that. That can be really helpful. So I find that when I give people concrete things that they can help me with, it really helps them understand OCD and understand how to support me.
Yeah, that sounds really amazing that you're able to really like um, sort of cater who you ask for what support and know that you've got sort of people in your corner even when you're maybe not at home and you're at, your school or something with friends and even sort of more acquaintances in the lab or things like that where you're working on school projects. So that's really
Yeah.
amazing. So thinking about like your family, and this would again then extend to friends when you're no longer living at home. How did your family sort of learn about accommodation that happens for OCD, and how did you guys work to get through that together?
Yeah, so I think that um, when I was initially in treatment, I think one of the, really key things that we learned about is how OCD really is able to also exert its control on the people that are close to the person with OCD. And so, you know, having my parents realize the ways in which they were accommodating the OCD and letting it, take over more and more, um, was really essential. So being able to pin down exactly what behaviors are accommodating the OCD was a big thing. So for me, a lot of it was about asking for reassurance. So I'd ask over and over, am I okay? Am I gonna get sick? Is this gonna make me sick? Is this safe? Things like that. And so, identifying for my parents that when I ask those questions and you give me the answer I want to hear, that accommodates the OCD, that allows it to grow bigger and bigger. And so, um, really identifying those key behaviors that were accommodating the OCD was a big thing. And then the second part of that is working with my parents or your friends or, the support system around you on what you're going to do when these behaviors come up. So one thing that was really helpful for my parents and I in terms of fighting OCD together was making a plan beforehand. So instead of, in the moment when I'm asking for reassurance, them saying, no, no reassurance this time, and me being like, what? Like, we didn't talk about this. And, it's a moment of distress for me. And, because these are people who care about me, it's a moment of distress for them. That doesn't really go well because nobody's, really thinking straight and things aren't going super well. So being able to make a plan in advance. So, in a calm time when we're not really, OCD isn't the main factor in the conversation. We would just take a moment and be like, okay, so next time I'm having an obsession and I ask for reassurance, what are we gonna do? And then we'd come up with some skills and strategies and things like that we would implement the next time that this happened. And then that way we would have a plan going into it. And then in the moment when, I asked for reassurance and they said no and used one of the plans that we talked about beforehand, I was able to be like, oh yeah, right. Like we talked about this and I know this is what I need to do. And it feels really hard right now, but I can do it. And so really having that planned out beforehand was helpful in terms of being on the same page and avoiding conflict and being able to work to fight OCD together.
Yeah. So what was one of those strategies? Like what would your parents say when you were asking for reassurance that would sort of remind you that that's what they're doing?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things is that they would help me, well, they would point out that this is an OCD thought. So they say, oh, it sounds like OCD is asking for reassurance right now. And then they would say something along the lines of, oftentimes they would ask the question back to me. So if I was like, oh, am I going to get sick? They'd be like, well, do you think you're going to get sick? And that would help me, bring back in the logic instead of, focusing it on OCD because OCD is telling me I'm going to get sick. Instead, asking me, Sophie, do you think you're going to get sick from this? And I logically know that the answer is no. And so that brings back the logic part of my brain. Other things were like when I asked for reassurance, they'd say, okay, I'm gonna walk away for 2 minutes. And then when I come back, if you still want to have this conversation, we can have the conversation. But I'm gonna let you sit with how you're feeling right now and think about the thought and come up with your own answer to the question. And then I'll come back and we can talk about it. And that was sort of a good intermediate one where I would still be able to get a little bit of reassurance, but I needed to sit with the uncomfortable feeling for a little while by myself. Um, and then eventually, as I was more able to cope with not being able to get any reassurance, they would just say no. Like I'd ask, is this going to make me sick? Or I'd ask for reassurance and they'd just say, I think you know the answer to that. Or, sounds like OCD is having something to say right now. Let's ignore it. Um, and then what was really helpful too is them suggesting something else. So I ask for reassurance, they'd, point out, oh, this sounds like an OCD thought. Why don't we go for a walk? Or why don't we read a book? Or do you want to come help me in the garden? Things like that. So being able to, I still need to sit with the uncomfortable feeling, but I'm also able to do something else to sort of get my mind away from it. That was really helpful as well.
Yeah, and it really comes down to that first tool that you talked about, I think, where you're able to separate OCD from yourself. Because I think for parents, it comes from such a place of love and compassion to try to help their child. But once they can understand that they're actually helping OCD, then they might get a little bit more on board with like, being willing to like not support it, right? Understanding that by saying, "Oh, we're not going to give you that reassurance right now," they're actually helping you. That can feel a little bit better for parents.
Yeah, exactly. And so what I was talking about before about being able to identify OCD as a third party and it's not me, that was really helpful for me and my family in terms of, framing it as me and my parents fighting against OCD versus my parents versus me and OCD. That was a really essential sort of mindset for us in terms of being able to move forward with fighting against OCD and cutting back on the reassurance that I needed while also being able to, feel compassion and things like that for around the fact that them taking away the reassurance is going to make me feel worse in the short term, but it will help in the long term. So that was a really important way for us to frame it in order to move forward.
Yeah, it's really important to understand that sort of like short term, it will be harder, but long term, it will be better because we really often want that short term relief, right? And so that's a huge thing to understand about working with OCD for sure. So you've talked about like a lot of different pieces here, which is really, really amazing. And I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you're thinking would be really important to share with people about OCD, maybe something that you wish you knew or any like advice or thoughts for anyone experiencing OCD.
Yeah, I think that, you know, because of the way that OCD operates, it sort of is always there without knowing. And probably growing up, I had very minor OCD that sort of dictated my life and behavior and things like that, but I didn't really know that that was a thing. And then following treatment, now I can identify the ways that OCD impacts my life, and I am so much better at being able to fight back against it. And so I think that really the quality of life that I have experienced following treatment is so much greater than before treatment because A, am able to identify the OCD and the ways it impacts my life and fight back against it. And B, I just know a lot more about myself and am, more emotionally literate and, in tune with how I'm feeling and things like that. And so that has really allowed me to live a far more fulfilling and satisfying life than I did before I accessed treatment. Um, the other thing is that undergoing treatment for OCD, while it's incredibly unpleasant and, not particularly enjoyable, it also is probably to this day the hardest thing I've ever done. Um, and so being able to beat something that's only in your head and being able to do it yourself, with the support of others around you, but really, I was the one doing the ERP and I was the one fighting back against it and being able to beat it and live a normal life on the other side. Um, that really is super empowering in terms of knowing that I can do things that are difficult and things that are uncomfortable. And yeah, just having more confidence in myself and my abilities after working through something that was really difficult. But I made it through.
Yeah, that's amazing. It sounds like such an empowering experience for you. And, have such a great awareness of yourself, since treatment, which is really, really incredible. And I so appreciate you sharing, this information with other people who are struggling, maybe with first getting diagnosed with OCD or our families trying to support someone who, is going through some really hard OCD moments as well right now. So I really appreciate your time. And If there's any other questions or anything that come up, or if anyone has any questions, we can probably answer them at a future time together, which would be really great.
Absolutely. I'm always more than happy to talk about my experience with OCD and strategies for OCD and anything to do with OCD, basically. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any other questions or things like that if anything comes up in the future.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, Sophie.